Sekeres Price for Tuesday, March 19th, 2024. We're coming to you from the Go-Goat Sports Studio, built by Arbor Lee, here at the iconic Wall Center, downtown Vancouver. If you are going to a game or heading to any event downtown, make it a staycation. Call the Wall, 604-331-1000. Ask for the Sekeres Price rate. Some blackout date supply. Matt Sekeres alongside Blake Price. Grady Sass, Hidden Switches, conducting things. We got a big show planned for you, and it's all a presentation of Applewood Auto Group.
Applewood Infinity in Richmond's got the QX50 and the QX55s from 2023 on a smashing deal. Right, smashing deal. Lease it for 1.99% up to 33 months, plus you get $1,500 in bonus cash right now. Applewood Infinity, the Richmond Auto Mall. It's all good at Applewood.
Tim Horton's poll question today: should Canucks fans be happy just making the playoffs? Yes or no? You can vote at Sekeres Price on Twitter and YouTube. Roll Up to Win is here for Tim's 60th anniversary. You can play on the Tim's app to win prizes. Daily cash jackpot of $10,000. You can win the all-electric Volkswagen ID4 and a sun-soaked Hilton getaway. Download the Tim's app. Roll Up is on until March 31st. Just a administrative note from us today. We have a little bit of construction going on in and around the Wall Center. So if you hear some drilling, banging, pounding, disassembling, the construction noise.
And no, that's not me in the producer's booth here.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the rumbling normally is coming from that booth. And he's been known to shake the earth, folks.
Yeah, there we go.
Yard sale.
I voted no on the poll question. I voted no on the poll question because I do think expectations needed to change at some point during this magnificent season for the Vancouver Canucks. I know at the beginning of the year, we could all say, hey, happy just making the playoffs. Everyone's just hoping they sneak in. But when you're first place, as long as you've been first place, and when you've made moves, the likes of Elias Lindholm and Nikita Zadorov, I do think you need to reset expectations. I think it would be a crying shame if our return of the Stanley Cup playoffs for the first time in 9 years in this city lasted only the one round. So absolute bare minimum for me is win a round. You can consider the rest gravy.
Yeah, I mean, it's not like this team has pedigree, so I understand why people are saying, hey, slow the roll. No, when you not only lead the division, when you not only lead the conference, when you lead the league for much of the season, you are just going to raise expectations. You're going to move that bar up. And now, I think it's pretty reasonable to say, hey, if you're able to do that, you should be able to take care of your first round opponent. It's not going to be easy.
No.
But I think it's a reasonable level of expectation.
Yeah, I think so as well. And particularly since, look, it could still be Vegas.
For sure.
But my sense is it's going to be LA, maybe Nashville. We've talked about it before. I think LA is infinitely beatable, so long as you don't get lulled into that horrible trap that they play. And Nashville has some injury issues now. Jeremy Lauzon has gone down. He's week to week. They have the great goaltender, but much like LA, not exactly a potent team, the Nashville Predators. So, if you go into a series and you're not necessarily terrified by a team's ability to score goals and or their goaltender, that should be winnable for a team like the Canucks that has the superstar at every level, right? It has the forward group, or at least do when Elias Pettersson is playing his best hockey, but JT Miller's there as well. You have the superstar defenseman in Quinn Hughes. You have the superstar goaltender in Thatcher Demko. Many different routes, many different formulas the Canucks can use to win playoff series. So I'd like to think that they get the first one. Any team that makes it to the conference final, unless you're a recent Stanley Cup champion or finalist, that is a successful season if you make it to the Final Four in this now 32-team league. So if they were to win a second round of the Stanley Cup playoffs, then you're absolutely playing with house money from there.
Regarding the simple act of making the playoffs, however, I can tell you the Canucks magic number is 6 wins, 12 points, whichever you prefer. And I bring that up only because it is a very busy night in the National Hockey League with 13 games. So a lot of chance for movement there. It could be a big swing night if the Oilers lose, the Canucks win. All sorts of stuff around the bottom of the bar too. It's this is a fun night in the NHL.
Yeah, scoreboard watching is great now, and like just Saturday's opponent, the Washington Capitals, they win again. They've won 3 in a row now and find themselves above the playoff bar at the expense of the Detroit Red Wings and New York Islanders in the East. And hey, like the Buffalo Sabres, Tuesday's opponent for the Vancouver Canucks, they're playing better hockey these days as well. They're +3 goal differential now.
Yep.
When you take a look at the depths from which they came now, they win in Seattle on Monday night. As JPAT notes, they have not swept any back-to-back series this year, Buffalo. Expecting Devin
Levi.
Levi, yes, to be the goaltender for the Sabres on the second of a back-to-back. We found out this morning, Tuesday morning, that Dakota Joshua is progressing, but the Canucks are being cautious with him. He will miss a 15th consecutive game for Vancouver. Has not played since that fight in the dying moments against Mackenzie Entwistle and the Chicago Blackhawks. 6-6-2 without Dakota Joshua, a chance to get above 500, and really a Canucks team that has just been okay since the All-Star break. Couple of games above 500. You mentioned the playoff bar, Blake, and I can tell you 3 teams have been eliminated in the West: San Jose, Chicago, and Anaheim on the outside looking in. And you have to eliminate 5 more teams? Do I have that right? Or 4 more teams? 1, 2, 3, 4. 5 more teams have to be eliminated before the Vancouver Canucks can secure their ticket and punch their berth for the first time in 9 years in this city, and of course the first time since the expanded bubble playoffs of 2020.
Regarding Joshua has to be Joshua when he comes back. So if he heads on the ice in any of these moments, and he is skating right now, folks, because he can, it's just hand injury. I'm sure every once in a while they ask him to take a shot and see how it feels. If he's feeling any tenderness, it's just not worth it. Dakota Joshua has to come back and beat Dakota Joshua. And that's not meaning fight. It just means he's going to have to be along the boards, hand up against the boards, receiving hits and that sort of thing. I mean, bring him back when he's ready to beat Dakota Joshua. If that means 2 more weeks of healing to make sure that when he takes a shot, when he's having to withstand contact along the boards, that he's not going to refracture. I'm assuming it was a fracture. Then you take those 2 weeks, because right now 500 is probably going to do it for the Canucks. That will probably get them the division, and maybe even the conference. Probably not the conference, but I think it gets them the division if they merely play 500. So if they can play just a little bit better than they have been, get Thatcher Demko back maybe in a couple of weeks' time, I think they're going to be okay without Dakota Joshua.
Nils Amon returns to the lineup for the Vancouver Canucks against Buffalo. He replaces Phil DiGiuseppe. He has not played since February 22nd, the loss at Seattle. So a little bit of a change-up after the Canucks lose a couple in a row here, including in regulation, as mentioned, to the Washington Capitals on Saturday. They got Montreal Thursday, Calgary Saturday. These are the last 2 games, Buffalo and Montreal, against Eastern Conference opponents. It is Western Conference after that throughout, and a lot of divisional play as well.
Yeah, I mean, this is a time to make some hay. There's some desperation, certainly from Buffalo, maybe from Calgary, but probably not by the time Saturday rolls along. But I mean, Calgary will still bring an A game for the Canucks each and every time out. So it's not like you're going to get pushback this week from the Vancouver Canucks, but it would be nice for them to look at 3 teams below the bar and just say, okay, these are our games to have. Let's go out and get them. You don't have to worry about a Colorado coming through here over the next 7 days.
Pointless in 2 straight for Elias Pettersson. 3 pointless games of the 6 so far in the month of March. Amusing moment at practice on Monday where he's asked, when you're at your best, you're moving your feet and attacking the line. Do you sometimes need a reminder of that? We know he's got the dry sense of humor. PD deadpans. I think I just got one.
I missed that one. That's good.
I found myself on Expo Boulevard yesterday, beside and behind Elias Pettersson in his vehicle. Yeah, absolutely. The general managers meetings are going on in Florida right now. Patrick Allvin in attendance, and he did an interview with Pierre LeBrun of The Athletic. It dropped Monday. I want to get to a few of the things that he said here, Blake. One of the interesting quotes that's making the rounds on re-signing his UFAs, Allvin, quote, "At this point, we probably wait until after the season. unless they come in and they're begging to sign a really team-friendly deal.
So they have to come to them.
Well, not many players come in begging to sign a team
at this time of year. No.
deal. But you do wonder whether Tyler Myers wants some certainty, wants the comfort of knowing that he can stay. As we've talked about before, there are specific family reasons why Tyler Myers wants to be here in British Columbia. Of course,
off-season home here. Yeah.
Off-season home here on top of medical care and the like. So you do wonder whether that might be the easiest deal to get done. We have covered it in the past, but there are some trickier negotiations. I mean, we'll see what Joshua looks like when he gets back, but needless to say, he has had a exemplary season and could probably hit the open market and make a fair buck. Our buddy Tony Gallagher last week, strong quote. How could you look at that body and that's the way that guy skates and give up on that guy? For, of course, Maple Leafs draft pick. He was in the St. Louis organization, so he might be a more difficult one. Elias Lindholm, I think the die is cast there. If you're going to slot him as the third line center, that's not what he's looking for. He's looking to play in a top two more scoring role with some better wingers. So I would be awfully surprised, particularly after getting Pettersson redone, if Elias Lindholm hasn't worked out here.
It would have to be a storybook playoff chapter written
something
that
like that.
Maybe compels him to want to return,
Right.
but
Something
it's
like
long
that.
odds.
Where are you on Sam Lafferty, who for the most part has had a pretty good season here with the Canucks? I know he's gone a little quiet here, as have many of the Canucks since the All-Star break. In fact, no points this month for Sam Lafferty. Hasn't scored since that aforementioned game in Seattle on the 22nd of February. That was the only point he had in February as well. So it's been a struggle for Lafferty after opening the season as well as he did with the Canucks. But of course, further down the lineup, where are you on a Lafferty extension, if at all?
I would offer him an extension, but I wouldn't offer him a penny more than he's making. In fact, I think I might almost be compelled at the age of 29.
$1.15 million.
He's 29. He just turned 29. So he's playing next season almost entirely as a 29-year-old. I would be tempted to offer him a multi-year deal at the same price or a million per even. You want to,
sometimes those fourth liners, those bottom six forwards, they don't want to just be on the year to year, have to, deal with the uncertainty, not to mention moving and whatnot. So sometimes they are inclined to sign a multi-year deal. And he's much more than a fourth liner, as it turns out. But of course, the classic example there is Lower Mainlander Colton Sissons, who signed the extended deal. Remember this, Blake?
Yes.
The extended deal with the Nashville Predators. We always talked about how Sissons' contract was unlike any contract in the NHL, 2.857 and change. But was it a 7-year deal? I think it was a 7-year deal. Yeah, a 7-year deal he signed in 2019, getting himself some certainty with that.
There is a new one. Pierre Engvall also got a 7-year, $3 million.
That was the Islanders.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
So Bluger, I suspect, is going to get a raise from his $1.9 million, playing more than 15 minutes a night with 24 points in 54 games. I mean, Patrick Allvin has talked about how, look, this is a place where you can develop and progress in your career. I think Teddy Bluger is proof positive of that. Was Vegas's 5th center last year and took a more forward role with the Canucks and has done well.
Going against him, though, is Father Time. He's 30 in training camp.
Mm-hmm.
So, what team? I mean, again, Jim Benning notwithstanding, he's not in the league. What team is offering a 30-year-old like a 4-year deal? Like, I don't think there's many.
No. Well, I have AFP's analytics projections pulled up right now. They got him at 2 years at $2.55 million.
Yeah. That seems
somewhere
reasonable.
in there. Cole, I think everything is reliant on how he looks down the stretch and through the playoffs. That's a 35-year-old who has logged a fair amount of minutes this year for the Canucks. We talked about Myers. Zadorov may well be too expensive, a right shot guy with size and a mean streak. And then there's Casey DeSmith, and Patrick mused to Pierre LeBrun about whether or not Casey DeSmith will be back next year. Put it this way. In fact, let's get to that quote now, because they were talking about Demko's workload, and Alvin said, quote, "I think this," meaning a goalie plan, "is something that we continue to manage." So it sounds like he isn't 100% thrilled with everything that's happened with the goaltender allotment this year. Continue to manage a plan that continues to manage. Look, you want to get the backup as many games as possible and keep the starter fresh. The fact of the matter is, with Alain Vigneault ringing in our ears, who's the guy who gives you the best chance to win? Well, night after night, it seems to be Thatcher Demko. We'll see if he's back on form when he returns from his injury.
As a coach, you can always make an excuse as to why you need to start the starter, right?
Yeah.
If you're not playing well, we need a starter to get us wins.
Exactly.
If you're playing well, we got to keep on keeping on. And then if you're, we're on top, we don't want to slide.
Right.
You can always find a reason why he needs to
tough
be in.
opponent tonight.
Yes.
You got to play our horse. He gives us the best chance to win. So there's always that. On Lindholm, Alvin, quote, "Initially, when we made the deal, I talked to his camp and said our intention was to sign him, but obviously it's got to work for both sides. We'll see. I think it's been a little bit of an adjustment time for him. And in fairness, the whole team hasn't played great. And that is fair. The whole team hasn't played great. If Lindholm had one great game before the playoffs, is that enough for you, or do you need to see it over?
No, I think people have seen that one great game. His opener.
Yeah, they've seen a couple of great games from
I think what they want is consistency and predictability, and a chance to see that he drives some play with the guys that he's been given. But it's just a lot to ask. This team had 3 lines when the Bluger line was going. And it's why I think that when Joshua does return for those final 2 weeks of the season, I'll assume he's back April 1st. Final 2 weeks of the season, you reassemble the Bluger line, and then you squeeze everybody else into, and then you're a 3-line team. And the 4th line is going to be, Amon, Lafferty, and whomever, and they're going to get 7 minutes in the playoffs, and maybe you practice that down the stretch as well, and that's okay. Good teams look like that. Good teams don't give their 4th line a lot of time come the playoffs, because you're done trying to prepare yourself for the marathon. The marathon's over. You're past the finish line at that point. This is the bonus time. So I'm okay with this team being a 3-line team in the playoffs. And that means that Lindholm's playing up with the big boys.
Yeah. He played a Canuck low 1354 against Washington. In fact, 2 of his last 3 games have featured 2 of the lowest ice time, 2 of the 3 lowest ice times he has seen as a Canuck. 1354 against Washington. He played 1429 in the 5-0 win against Winnipeg. Previously, the low had been 14 minutes 11 seconds in his second game with the Canucks against the Boston Bruins. But in the first month that he was here, you remember he came over after the All-Star break, so he had pretty much the entire month of February here. He played 5 different nights of 20-plus minutes. He has not cracked 20 minutes in 6 games in March. In fact, he hasn't come close. 18-23 against Colorado in an overtime game, but everything else is in the 13, 14, 15-minute range for Elias Lindholm. So very much being used as a 3rd-line player with some special teams utility right now. And you can understand why, the extension talks would be entirely on hold with that sort of deployment.
Yeah, I don't know that they are themselves that enamored with an extension. I mean, they're going to need to see something from the player before they have any interest in an extension. And so I think both sides have got each other at arm's length right now. And that doesn't mean that there's anything boiling over on the ice. I don't think this is why Elias Lindholm is not playing well. There's off-ice stuff. There's on-ice stuff. And on ice, I think it's all copacetic with him and Rick Tocchet. I would love to know. Give him the truth serum. Is Lindholm wanting to play with Pettersson? Or is he wanting to be the man down the middle for sure? I
think the sweet spot might be
down the middle with Pettersson. Yes,
plays the wing.
Yeah,
and Tocchet has called him the center. and for the most part deployed him as a center.
It was a great thought. That was what they wanted it to be. But
the other thing that was interesting from Alvin's messaging, and got to welcome Matt coming up on this, so I'll give you your shout at it here right now. He told LeBron, quote, a lot of guys haven't played in the playoffs, and then circled back later in the conversation and said, we've got guys who haven't played important games in March. I've interpreted that as a little bit of managing expectations for the Stanley Cup playoffs, that if this young group that doesn't have the most playoff experience were to fall flat, that they could chalk it up to one of his favorite words, process, right?
Yeah.
That this is part of the process. I think that also might be tinged or influenced by the fact they didn't get that winger they needed by the trade deadline. I still sort of sense a general sort of malaise around Alvin. I think it was evident that Friday when he talked at the press conference, the trade deadline of doing nothing. I think it's been the same in some of his comments that we have seen since. I still generally get the sense that he's frustrated, maybe even kicking himself a little bit about not getting another winger or not having the goods or the wherewithal, as he's explained a couple times, to get a winger. But do you anticipate we'll hear some of that managing expectations, under promise, over deliver, as the Canucks make their way back to the Stanley Cup playoffs for the first time in 4 years and 9 years here in town?
I think he's just suggesting that if they don't look fabulous right now, there's a reason for it. But and we've talked about this before, that some teams, too dumb to know better works sometimes. The Carolina Hurricanes are a great example of that. The Winnipeg Jets not too many years ago. It's sometimes ignorance is bliss there, and you just play like nothing matters, and that's good enough to make it work too. So I'm of many minds of it. Then there's other teams that, remember the original core of the Avalanche with Nathan McKinnon made the playoffs that first year, went to 7 games at the Wild, didn't go to the playoffs for 3 more years after that.
Oh, Edmonton 2 years after their first.
Right.
Yeah.
So you got that baptism, and then you couldn't figure it out again. So there's no tried and true way of how this works. If there was, every team would do it. But
you do typically have to take some lumps, right? Like, for example, the young Blackhawks team with Taves and Kane. If I'm not mistaken, they made it to the conference final in their first year in the playoffs. Got sort of slapped aside by Detroit, who at the time was the league power.
Yeah.
And that's all they needed. And was game on from that point forward. And of course, we saw that against the Vancouver Canucks 3 straight postseasons. One thing we do know is that Jonathan Lekrimaki will not be riding into town on a white horse to save the day.
Nor did I think anybody expect that.
No, but I mean, a goal-scoring winger having the season he's having, I think some were daring to dream that he might be a tonic for what ails the Canucks on the flanks. The Swedish national team, Alvin allowed, reached out to the Vancouver Canucks and expressed that they would like to have him on their team for the World Championships in Prague and Ostrava, Czech Republic. So it sounds like Lekrimaki is going to head there to the Trey Kroners as opposed to coming to Abbotsford, as the Canucks had initially hoped. And his season's over now?
Season's over. And there's pluses to both. Like, I don't know that one is a terrible letdown. He's going to play against National Hockey League players in the World Championships, granted in a slightly different kind of game, because some of that will be on slightly bigger ice and that sort of thing. And it's just a different style of game than you'd see in the National Hockey League or in the American Hockey League. But it's still a step up. Like, it's still a good experience for Jonathan Lekrimaki. And I think that, it's not a terrible developmental step that's being missed by having him play a couple of AHL games this season. Again, it would only be a handful at best because he's not eligible for the AHL playoffs. So I don't think that's a bad thing. By all accounts, the camp for that Swedish team might start sometime this week, I believe. And they keep sort of a barnstorming group together until everybody's available for the World Championship main camp, in the late part of April. So he's going to be on the ice still. No steps backward for Lekrimaki. And And Canucks fans can look forward to him in September.
The general managers, as mentioned, meeting in Florida. A number of rule changes have come to fruition. Now, none of these are confirmed yet. They do have to go through a process of the competition committee and board of governors, but let's just bullet list them. They want to add goaltenders to the list of players who can get a penalty for intentionally dislodging the net.
Mhm.
I thought there already was a penalty that applied to goaltenders for that. And if the goaltender turns around and knocks the net off, it's more.
Yeah, I was surprised
I thought that was already
So did I.
a penalty.
Yeah.
On face-offs after icing, right now the defensive zone center gets a warning. The offensive center gets tossed. They're talking about giving a warning to the offensive center.
Like it's equitable, yes.
Well, but it delays proceeding. Why not no warning? Remember the hurry-up face-off? Remember when that was the thing?
Yeah.
And I mean, it's still faster than it used to be, but anyways.
I'm taking issue with that goalie one.
With the one we were just about to mention about concussions, you mean?
No, the one before you just mentioned. Because it's up to the arena to seal the pegs with the post, the arena staff there. So, in my conspiracy tinfoil world, I'm thinking, well, what if they kind of make the pegs a little weaker before? Goalies rely so much on post play, pushing in and out of it now to recover. Could we see a weaker kind of peg to the ice, first intermission?
I think it has to
game?
be pretty outright.
Yeah, like a full on, intentional.
Malicious.
But that's where it could become subjective with certain referees.
Two other goalie ones, though. If a goalie's pulled by a concussion spotter, the replacement gets a warm-up, which stands to reason, as long as that's not 5 minutes.
Again, I thought that was already a thing.
No, it hasn't been.
Sharpen up.
It doesn't happen.
How often does a goalie get pulled by the concussion
Once
spotter?
or twice a season, yeah. The other one is if a goalie loses his mask and plays blown dead, the other team gets the offensive zone draw with a choice of the dot, no matter where the puck was on the ice when the whistle is blown. And then these are the bigger ones. Coaches' challenges for puck over glass. They can ask for a video review to prove it did hit something on the way over. That's not bad. If you're wrong, on this challenge, it's 5-on-3.
That's right. So it is a place you have to go very gingerly.
Yes.
Yeah.
The original penalty's there and the additional. So that is a heck of a risk. And then minor penalty for high sticks can be challenged now to show it was a teammate stick. But again, same rule applies. You've already got the penalty there. So it's either 5-on-5 or 5-on-3, your choice.
And because of the high stakes there, I imagine you won't see that review used very often. I think it's almost going to have to be clear as day that it was a friendly fire high stick or that it did hit something on its way out of the playing area.
So what
to see anybody use that.
So the onus is now on it, and they've already got this, the video assistant coach upstairs. That video assistant coach just got some more duties put on his plate. And you've got to
plate.
And you've got to look at, those replays quickly so as to give your coach time to throw out the flag, if you will, and get that coach's review.
John Tortorella, former Vancouver Canucks head coach. Stop me if you've heard this one before.
He's something.
Is scratching Flyers captain Sean Couturier. He was named captain within the last month, and he's already on the wrong side of torts. He's being sat down for the game against the Maple Leafs alongside Cam Atkinson, Dennis Gurianov. Couturier met the media and said he can only control what he can control. Torts blew the media off on this one.
Oh, he didn't want to face the music.
Yeah. So holding players accountable.
Yeah.
But not being accountable ourselves.
I don't want to have to tell the media why I did what I did.
Do you see the hypocrisy here, Torts?
Doesn't it speak for itself, though?
And, of course, everyone waited with bated breath to see what Strombone 1 will tweet about this.
Yes, he was once healthy, scratched himself in a fairly large game at BC Place Stadium.
Large in terms of the confines.
Of the
stadium.
Yeah. Yeah, there wasn't much at stake
against the Ottawa Senators in that rematch of the 17
Stanley Cup, yes. Philadelphia currently sitting in a playoff spot, remember?
Well, that's the thing that's odd about it is
The GM came out and spoke about it.
I mean, Briere said he gave it his blessing, but that's a team that ostensibly is fighting for a playoff spot, although has messaged everything to the fans about a longer-term plan and a rebuild.
Still,
It's actually even used the word rebuild.
Rarely do you risk playoff dates if you're an NHL organization,
Right?
And they are not home and clear in the playoff race, and they have determined that two of their historically very best players do not give them a better chance to win tonight than Joe Schmoes.
The one thing I'll say though is that, and this stems from all the way going back to the late Ed Snyder. There is one team in the NHL that behaves quite uniquely in terms of Stanley Cup or bust, and that's the Philadelphia Flyers. Philadelphia historically has not been too concerned about just making the playoffs. It's how can we win a cup? And of course, haven't won one since the 70s. Have knocked the door, I want to say 6 times. They've lost the final since the 70s. You know, and you've seen that in terms of the way they've handled coaches over the years, the way they're in on tons of big name players all the time. You know, it's very much and, you know, let's face it, it's a great sports town, and the Flyers punch better than most NHL teams in the crowded sports market. But, you know, like this is a big city where, you know, you're not necessarily just looking to make it into the playoffs. You're looking to win a title.
But there's no sport where, and I know nobody likes to hear just get in, you never know what happens, because that's not necessarily true. But this sport lends itself to the 5th best team winning a Stanley Cup. And I mean, in the conference more than any other sport. So
more recently.
Yeah.
Yes.
So if you are the Flyers and you've previously held that, well, okay, that might have worked back in the day. Nowadays, within reason, get in, you got a decent chance.
Alex Ovechkin, he scores twice. He hits the 20-goal plateau for a 19th time in his career. He is now tied with Brendan Shanahan for the longest consecutive streak of 20-goal seasons, behind only Gordie Howe, who did it 22 times. He's actually got the 3rd most 20-goal seasons of all time, behind Mr. Hockey and
Mike Gartner.
See, I wanted to say Gartner too when I heard this stat last night, but no, not Gartner, not Shanahan. Grady, care to guess?
Andrew Chick.
No.
Luc Robitaille.
Yeah, that's a good one. Gary Curry.
You don't think of this guy as much as a goal scorer, as a point producer, but Ron Francis, had 20 goal years. He had an interruption, so he's not on the streak list, but came back and scored 20 goals. As mentioned, the Capitals in playoff position now, where it's a fun race in the East, at least. We'll see if the West can keep up as well. And speaking of Ron Francis, Kraken lose to Buffalo on home ice. Kraken have lost 3 in a row here.
5 in a row of any sort.
Yeah, right. 3 regulation losses. Kraken are 14, 15, and 6 at Climate Pledge, so they haven't really exactly they're better on the road. Been great in front of the home faithful. And they got Softy Mahler of KJR tweeting about them. Good Lord. Ron Francis kept this team together, and they completely fell apart. Lost 5 in a row, including to Buffalo last night. Now, when he says it kept them together, they did send Alexander Wenberg to the New York Rangers for a draft pick at the deadline, but he re-signed Jordan Eberle. He did not trade Justin Schultz and some of the other UFAs. It's kind of a little reminiscent of year 1 for the Kraken. Very subdued. Didn't quite create the spark and energy and all that you would hope in a new market. Now, did so last year. Got to the 7th game of the second round with an upset of the Colorado Avalanche. So all the good tidings were there last year. And then there's Shane Wright, Blake. You may remember mean face Shane Wright.
Yes.
The 4th pick in the 2022 entry draft. Could have gone number 1 overall, the Montreal Canadiens. They chose Slavkovsky. Got into 8 NHL games last year before he was loaned to Team Canada and the World Juniors. He's played 3 NHL games, 50 AHL games with 38 points, 19 and 19, but just the 3 NHL games this year. And you got to go back to November when he played. So he did not get a recall.
Yeah.
After Wenberg, a centerman.
And strange because that's a very nice season for him down in the American League.
Oh, for 1920 or he turned 20 in January.
Yeah, so he played much of this season as a 19-year-old in the AHL, which is not easy. And knocking on the door of points per game, 20-goal season seems all but assured. That's a little strange. You don't give him a look. I mean, nothing's going to be ruined there. He'll develop just fine, but I would have been curious if I was the Seattle Kraken.
Well, Ron Francis is one of the more conservative general managers in the National Hockey League. I mean, Ronnie Patience almost applies to him. And, are we past the Detroit Red Wings model of over-marinating prospects in the minors? Riker Evans is up, their best defense prospect, and he's playing games in the National Hockey League. In fact, played 21 and a half minutes last night. But that was a guy that some people looked at and thought, he might make this team out of training camp. He gives them a different dimension on the blue line. Made his NHL debut in December, and he's played, I think he's up to 23 games or something like that now. But, a couple of Seattle prospects didn't necessarily make the mark that I think some people expected at the beginning of the year, which is fine if you've got a great team and you're going to the playoffs and you don't have room for them, but it's a little more difficult to explain when you're a poor team. They have opportunity now to play the kids. They are not in this wild card race anymore. Now 11 back of the Vegas Golden Knights with the same number of games and 4 teams to jump. So it's not going to be a Stanley Cup playoff season down the I-5 for our friends in Seattle. And I say our friends in Seattle because really this rivalry has not gotten off the
well, from their standpoint it might be because
they hate Tyler Myers.
Bully Tyler Myers. From the Canucks perspective, not so much.
Let's get to today's menu, and it's brought to you by Ben Moss Jewelers. Ben Moss Jewelers, proudly Canadian-owned, operated, a history dating back more than 100 years, 5 locations in BC, including Willowbrook and Langley and Coquitlam Center, committed to customer satisfaction. You can check out the large selection of Canadian mined diamonds, lab-grown diamonds. These mined diamonds available with the payment plan to suit your needs. For more info, check out benmoss.com. Ben Moss, because love is timeless. We'll get to a welcome mat here on the podcast side. John Shannon is going to join us. We'll ask him the poll question, also talk about NHL expansion, the general managers meetings, and beyond. Elise Pettersson, Tyler Myers featuring in that discussion. We'll do some hashtags, the best and worst of Twitter. I love building up to NFL draft season and the different rumors and philosophies that start entering the mainstream when you start talking about these teams, particularly the teams with high picks that are looking at quarterbacks. Tyler Zickel, Vancouver Canadians play-by-play man, is going to join us from Florida. He is there covering spring training. First time he's made it down to Blue Jays spring training as a member of the organization. He's been 4 years here now in Vancouver, 3 years beyond that in the Jays organization. So we'll talk to him about the different Vancouver Canadians angles that are playing out down there.
And that season's not far away.
Well, in fact, Blake, the Major League Baseball season starts tomorrow, if you're so inclined. I believe it's a 3:30 a.m. wake-up call to watch the Dodgers and Padres from Korea.
Korea, right? Yeah.
Of course, for everybody else, we're a couple weeks away here.
But 21 days away from the seats?
Oh, yeah. April 9th is the home opener for the Vancouver Canadians down at the Nat, and suggest you get tickets. They become a hot one.
Yes.
No pun intended, in the summer.
In a season like this, you never want to miss a single second of what's happening on the ice, and you want to be around your fellow fans, right? Well, Greta Bar YVR at 50 West Cordova, the perfect spot to do so. Hey, if you've got tickets, a great place to pre and post. They've got drink specials every single day. And if you don't have tickets, well, stick around and soak up the atmosphere with all your fellow fans, play all the great video games and air hockey, great air hockey setup as well at Greta Bar YVR. We'll see you there, 50 West Cordova.
Great Clips is the official hair salon of the National Hockey League. There are 37 salons in Vancouver and the Lower Mainland, all Canadian-owned and operated. Download the app and find the nearest to you. When you're up next for a cut, you'll get a ready next text. Great Clips. It's going to be great. Joined now by the former executive producer of Hockey Night in Canada, the co-host of the Bob McCowan podcast, the pride of Oliver, British Columbia, Mr. John Shannon. We're shouting Oliver today, John, because we want you to put your Canucks fan hat on. We're asking on our Tim Hortons poll question, should Canucks fans simply be happy with making the playoffs?
If you had asked me in December, the answer is yes. If you ask me on March the 19th, the answer is no way.
Mm-hmm.
They've got to go farther than the first round now, for sure. I mean, that's the year that they've had. That's the investment that this team has made in this roster. So I think expectations have changed in British Columbia when it comes to the Canucks, and I certainly think that the expectations have changed for the club itself. So that's an easy no way vote for me.
Would one round be enough?
Well, how about if we go one round and 6 games, Matty? I mean, I don't know the answer to that. They have to view success as of getting out of the first round, in my opinion. They're going to meet a tough team in the first round, and they're going to meet a tougher team in the second. And if they get to the third, it's going to even be tougher than that. And so from that perspective, I think you can probably measure the success based on the competition. So if they are able to play a team that they win in 6 games in round one, and then face the Edmonton Oilers or the Vegas Golden Knights and take them or lose in 7, then I think it's a success. But it's hard to sit here and say without knowing who the competition is.
Well, Blake and I sometimes poke fun of our friends in the Alberta capital, because in 2017 they lost in round 2, I believe, in 6 games, and talked about how it was lost in 7 games, and talked about how it was a, quote, magical run.
There was a CBC promo that year
for a young Oilers team that was making its first foray into the Stanley Cup.
Relive the Oilers' magical run through the playoffs.
Should their inexperience be held against them, John, or should the inexperience count for something as they make their way into the Stanley Cup playoffs?
Well, I think we'd be silly not to think there won't be a learning curve for this group. When you consider what they've been through, what they haven't been through. I mean, are we going to point at the success in the bubble and say that was success and that they're going to learn from it? I almost want to take everything that happened in the bubble and throw it out, because it was such a different animal than what you regularly see in a Stanley Cup playoff series. There is going to be, I guarantee you, at some point in the postseason, some disappointment for Canuck fans. There will be, but the expectation should not wane based on the fact is. I mean, do I think they're going to win the Stanley Cup? No, I don't. I don't think they're going to win the Stanley Cup. Are they going to make a dent? Yeah, they're going to make a dent, and that's a real positive at this point.
It's a shame in this first year back into the playoffs, real playoffs in 10 years. This happens to be in the ebb and flow of performance. The Western Conference is riding a high right now. The Western Conference has the bulk of the talent, in my opinion. If they were winning the Metropolitan Division right now, you'd certainly like their chances of making it to the conference finals. You're probably less likely to face a juggernaut if you're winning the Metro this year.
I think you're right. We might get a measure of that, Blake, tonight. Winnipeg is in Madison Square Garden to play the Rangers. We might get a real sense of where the East versus West is when it comes to competition. There are times I've always believed that, the Eastern teams, whether there was only 3 or 4 of them that were high echelon teams. We're actually better than anything in the West. But I don't think that's the case this year. I think the West is certainly deeper. You look at the three teams in the Central, Winnipeg, Dallas, and Colorado. You guys saw what Colorado does.
Mm-hmm.
We had a good example of that last week in both Vancouver and in Edmonton. So from that perspective, I think the strength of the West is in the Central plus the Canucks and Oilers. Vegas is still.
They got to be
Vegas
there.
Is on the. Well, I tell you what.
They're not playing well, but they still got to be there. They got the pedigree, John. The question would be, if the Vegas Golden Knights went on a run through the playoffs and made the Stanley Cup final, would you be surprised? Come on, the answer is no.
I wouldn't be.
Yeah,
I wouldn't be. And a lot of it's going to come down to how good their goaltending is, because I love their defense. Jack Eichel's proved to be the real deal as one of their key forwards. But then it's going to, the onus on Aiden Hill and Logan Thompson to be the difference makers, and that's something that they haven't had a lot of this year.
It's true.
Winnipeg on the marquee at MSG. Gary's worst nightmare.
Oh, man.
It's happening here tonight.
Oh, come on now.
You know damn well, Shannon, that was always the big fear. We really want to put Winnipeg on the marquee at MSG, and I have all these New Yorkers go by and snicker, go, who the hell is Winnipeg?
Yeah,
Where the hell is
Steve from Queens isn't walking by the marquee going, oh, Winnipeg's in town. Oh, maybe I'll buy today.
Hey, listen, we've always sold on our, every marketing department of your own team sells on not who's coming to town, but your team.
Which
leads to a question, not that I'm trying to take over this segment, which leads to the question of schedule. 20 years ago, people were lamenting the fact that Alex Ovechkin and Sidney Crosby were only coming to Western Canada once every 2 years. Do we need to see every team in every arena anymore? I think that there's going to be a ton of traction about rejigging the schedule to discuss whether they want more rivalries on a regional basis. I'd like to see Colorado guaranteed 2 games against the Canucks at Rogers Arena every year.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, they can't guarantee that the way the schedule's built, simply because you still have to go to the East and play them home and home. Right. So do you want to limit the amount of Eastern games and then put more onus on divisional and conference play? I think that's going to be a question that's going to come up.
Well, let me ask you this, Sean. And incidentally, let's take Connor Bedard twice per year, every year with the Blackhawks here, back in his hometown, right?
I rest my case, sure.
Let me ask you this, John. Is that a little bit of the difference between Canadian hockey fans and American hockey fans, in that the regional rivalries, Penguins, Flyers, Devils, Rangers, Islanders, Rangers, all that, those are more meaningful games to them, whereas we here in Canada absolutely want to see every team and every star, not even superstar, just every star in the building once per season?
I think a lot of what we did when I was at the league at that point was to make sure that every Canadian fan saw every key player. Yes, I do think that that's something. But I'll tell you what, you joke about it. I do know that there are teams in the Eastern Conference that are saying, why are we watching the Calgary Flames? We don't need the Calgary Flames in our building. We need the New Jersey Devils. We need the Carolina Hurricanes. I do think that conversation is going to occur, and it's not a knock at the Calgary Flames. At the same time, do we really need to see the New Jersey Devils in Calgary, Edmonton, and Vancouver? Do we? I don't know. Once every second year, maybe, but do we need to see them every year?
Somebody's going to get pissed off that McKinnon, McDavid, and Bedard
Here's family on line one for John. Yes, they need to see all their boys playing together.
The excuse I always heard, though, with the NHL was the superstars need to be shared, and that if they're not in everybody's building, that's a problem. But, of course, Americans have grown up with the NFL where they don't get to see Patrick Mahomes every year, right?
No, but they get to see him on television, and that's one thing that I think has really changed in both countries, is the accessibility of the 1,300 games that you get to watch on television if you want to. If you're really a serious hockey fan, you do buy the NHL package, and you do get to see all those games.
But you do get to see LeBron James in every building. every year in the NBA, unless it's a load management game.
That's right.
We've seen
different
but here's the deal.
We've seen
They
that.
have less games. You know, you don't laugh. They have less games.
Yeah.
You know, and that's this discussion did not really exist in a 32-team league.
Right.
This was something that's the fine line, is you could probably hedge it when you had only 30 teams at when the decision was way back in 2005.
Then that brings me to 34, John, or 33. Well, what do you make of this Anson Carter Atlanta group? And would that be in concert with another expansion franchise?
Yeah, we're going to have two in Atlanta.
You're going to have what?
No, I'm just
two in Atlanta. Yeah,
by the way, there's more than one group in Atlanta, and just to give everyone their due is that there's a group that Anson's part of, and then there's another group by a local billionaire that already has architectural drawings for a new building in place and ready to do structural discussions and soil sampling at a place in the North County of the Atlanta area. So I think we got the message from Bill Gary last week is that we really appreciate Anson's enthusiasm, but we're just not there yet. And I think we're still a ways away from expansion. We have to solve Arizona first. We have to solve Arizona first before we do anything about expansion.
That's going to be Salt Lake City, right? Like teams going to have to move to Salt Lake City. Yeah. Okay.
I think so. Yeah.
Do you know if Mr. Fertitta in Houston, the owner of the Rockets in the building there, is still interested? At one point he was talked about. In fact, at one point, I think he came out and said something about it, but do you know whether Houston and the Rockets ownership there is viable?
Well, they're viable for sure, but they're interested. Yes. And one of the reasons they're interested is because what they don't want to is have a second building in Houston to compete with them for other things.
Right.
So you know it's the devil in so many ways for Tillman Fertitta and the people in Houston. So I do think there's interest in Houston by his group, and one of the key reasons is to make sure that there's not another competing arena in the marketplace. So if you look at Houston, you look at Atlanta, you look at I still think the best option for an eighth Canadian team is here in Toronto. And then where else are we going to go? I think Gary's in a pretty good situation right now. Let's figure out what goes on with Arizona first, and then we can figure out if and when expansion takes place. And I don't see expansion taking place before any of the collective bargaining agreement discussions are finished and a new CBA is in place and a new TV deal in the United States in place. So we're 4 years away.
Hey, do you think the PA's got any chance to get some of those expansion revenues in the new CBA? Do you think they'll make the case? At least use it as a bargaining chip?
They'll make the case. I'm not sure they'll win that.
Yeah. Well,
and the question is what will Gary give up in order to keep that $1 billion for the other owners?
That's it. I mean, Gary has lorded international play in the Olympics over them as a bargaining chip. I think it would only be right if the PA does the same with expansion revenues, which right now the players do not share.
GM meetings, any big takeaways for you, John, whether it's overtime tweaks or LTIR? Do you think anything comes of these GM meetings?
No, this is a place setter. This is a the discussions, the breakout groups, the big group. Do they want to expand video replay on puck over glass? I think it's a mistake for a more of a practical reason than anything else. But at the same time, I think what we'll do is that people will say we're going to discuss this and put this to the forefront. Nothing's going to change in overtime, guys. They're really happy with overtime. They don't want to tweak it. If you want to go take the puck outside the blue line and regroup, that's at your own risk. It may not be exciting, but overall, I think overtime is pretty damn good. So,
John, how about time to review? People have said, why don't you just put a limit on time? Like the ref can be at that TV for 90 seconds, and if he doesn't see it in 90 seconds, he's got to move on. How about that?
Because maybe it's more difficult than you think. And do you want to get it right, or you just want to put a time limit on it? You know, if you're going, this is the downside. This is what I mean. I remember sitting in the meetings with the managers, with the board, and Gary warned them of this, that if we go down this track, it will be an issue at some time. You know, the worst complaint, I mean, it's fascinating. Connor McDavid has a big voice in this league, and he claimed it was 15 minutes for that review in Chicago. It was just over 4. It felt like 15, but it was just over 4. Mm-hmm. So you have to put these kind of things in a practical sense more than anything else. If you want video review, this is what you're going to get. And if you don't have video review, you're going to bitch and complain that was offside and your team got cheated.
But
so,
why is it tough? You say it's more difficult than you think. In what sense? It's the digital age. My God, we can do anything in split seconds here. What's the holdup?
Camera angles, speed. You know, there are still discussion points. I mean, they cannot zoom in that close without pixelating things. There are still some issues that way. It's not a perfect science. It still is not a perfect science. So is it close? Sure, it's close, but it's not a perfect science. And do you want to wait the extra 2 minutes or 2.5 minutes to be right, or just say, okay, you've got a time limit? Because what's going to happen is, and all it needs to do is to happen to the Vancouver Canucks once for the Vancouver Canuck fans to be in an uproar. And nobody wants Canuck fans in an uproar. They are not fun when they're like that.
We take no responsibility for them.
Almost nobody.
I would say on that if you can't, like, if it's not abundantly obvious in the first couple of go arounds, whether you zoom in or not, if even from the original TV angle, if you still can't tell, then I don't care if it's right or not. That's the reasonable expectation. It's like even in court, you know, no one's saying definitively. It's just beyond a reasonable doubt, you know, like, and that's all we're looking for here is that if you can't see it immediately, it's probably not worth talking about because we're not.
By the way, Blake, it isn't your money. When that offside decides a series and the Canucks lose out and, you know, $5 million gates for 4 more gates at home, that's $20 million for the Canucks. That's when it means something. And that's what you have to keep that in mind.
You're absolutely right. I care not for a single penny of that man's money.
You think he'll miss any meals in that event?
Who, Blake?
No, Francesco.
I always worry about, you know, rich
billionaires'
guys.
money.
Yeah, that's right.
Hey, speaking of rich guy, Elias Pettersson, you worried about him right now?
No. In many ways, this is the dog days of the season. The Canucks are in the playoffs. You know, everybody's taken. They've got a target on their back. He's the latest target because he's the richest target. It will work out. Life will be fine. He's still a great player. He hasn't changed anything. It'll just, and by the time the playoffs come, Pettersson will be a factor.
Alvin said he doesn't suspect any of his UFA work will get done before the end of the season, unless somebody is willing to take a team-friendly deal. We know Tyler Myers is very well established here in British Columbia with his family. We know there are specific family needs here in British Columbia for his son. We're wondering, would it be wise if the Canucks tried to jump the market, get ahead of the market on a right shot defenseman and see if he's willing to sign a club-friendly deal? What says you?
Well, you could always do that, you know, and let's face it, that's exactly what they've done with Philip Hronek, too. They threw out a dollar figure to him, and by the way, it got rejected rather quickly. You have nothing to lose by throwing a number out. But what the challenge of that becomes, if you throw a number out, are you negotiating? And do you want to be negotiating at this time of year? That becomes the real question. So there's two sides to that story that I think that you have to watch for.
Mr. Shannon, we thank you for this. You've edified us, and we will look for this new rejig schedule, which honestly, when Sydney and Ovi are retired and gone,
Right.
Blake, I'm not sure I need to see every Eastern Conference team here.
It's a lot of pressure on Jack Hughes to carry the Eastern Conference.
I mean, as good a player like Sam Reinhart, Jack Hughes, you've got some terrific Austin Matthews, you got some terrific players in the Eastern Conference, but I'm not sure you have a.
I don't need to see them. No.
Yeah, I'm not sure you have a transcendent one that I would need to see.
I know there are presidents of clubs in the East saying, "Why do we need to see all the teams in the West all the time?"
Yep. And I can understand that as well, because you get a litany of Canadian teams in some of those U.S. markets.
You face one division per year. That's
great stuff.
Yep.
John, thanks for this. Until next week.
Cheers, boys.
Hey, everybody. If you're enjoying what you're seeing here, then follow along with Sekeres Price on YouTube. I promise more content coming.
The kids call it subscribe on YouTube.
Well, how about liking it?
Do that as well. Smash it right now.